There's a tendency among Nintendo fans to present Shigeru Miyamoto as a god among men, a divine creator from whom all good video gaming springs. If there's one lesson that we can learn from Popeye, it's that Miyamoto is mortal. Of the three launch games, Donkey Kong is a masterpiece. Donkey Kong Jr. is very flawed, but there's still some fun in it. And Popeye is the mistake. Now don't get me wrong, for a 1983 arcade game, Popeye is fine. I've played and will play much worse than it, but as one of the three foundational titles for the Famicom, it just doesn't stand up. Every few years I forget how much I dislike playing Popeye. And I think, oh yeah, Popeye, that was a fun arcade game. And then I play it again and I go, oh right. This is why I don't like it. Similar to Donkey Kong, heavy compromises were made to bring Popeye to the Famicom. But unlike Donkey Kong, the compromises made to Popeye were core aspects of the gameplay. It took an already iffy arcade game and made it worse. So let's walk through the game and take a look at what went wrong and what went right in Popeye. All three levels on Popeye have the same basic premise. Olive Oil is at the top, and she is throwing out objects that Popeye has to collect before they fall off the stage. If they hit the bottom, they last for a short time before they break, and then you lose a life if that happens. Collect 24 of these items and you move on to the next stage. While you're collecting these, you're pursued by Bluto, who jumps around from platform, reaches up and down, and throws bottles at you if you're on the same level as he is. Bluto can only be stopped by picking up some spinach and running him down. While you're powered up by the spinach, Popeye's theme song from the old cartoons plays, and all scoring is doubled. And that's one of my first complaints about the game. Spinach is the iconic thing for Popeye. He eats spinach and then punches out Bluto. Bluto takes off running as soon as you collect the spinach and always moves away from Popeye. The level layouts can make it very difficult to catch Bluto if you're not in the right position when you collect the spinach. It reduces the impact of collecting it, and because there's only one can of spinach per level per life, if you miss it, it feels like you've missed out on a big part of the game. On top of that, if you do knock him out, you often can't do anything else while you wait for the song to finish playing. Falling items don't move while Popeye's theme is playing, and so if you collect all of them, you might be waiting 5 or 10 seconds with nothing to do, listening to the music. After you complete all three levels once on Game A, or immediately on Game B, the Sea Hag also appears in the upper right, dropping skulls down. The skulls will bounce around on the floor, and those you can punch out. Let's start looking at the individual levels. The first stage just has a set of tiers that you can walk back and forth on, with stairs and a ladder in the middle. It's very open. The spot where the sign says through means that you can go out that left side and come back on the right. The most notable thing on this one is at the very top there's that tub. If you jump off that little platform and punch, you'll knock it down, and if Bluto is standing right underneath it, you'll put it on his head and stun him for a few seconds. It's a nice cartoony touch, but it's also something that's easier said than done. This first stage is a good place to point out the differences between the arcade and the Famicom version. In the arcade, the Sea Witch is an omnipresent threat, constantly appearing at the sides to throw extra bottles at Popeye. Here, she's restrained to appearing only in the upper right-hand corner and throwing skulls. The items Olive throws in the arcade version are much more numerous and fast-moving. It gives the game a more frantic pace. Now, they always step down the difficulty a bit when they bring it home. But in Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., Game B was roughly equivalent to the arcade difficulty. Here, it never gets as challenging as the arcade. The second level has Olive singing out notes from an apartment, and it has a much more tricky layout. On the left-hand side of the screen is a seesaw which you can jump down to and get shot up to the top to Sweepy for some extra points. If Bluto jumps down that left-hand side, he doesn't go up quite as high as Popeye does. The third and final level has Olive screaming for help from the top of a ship. This level adds in a new obstacle with a buzzard that flies around, but the buzzard can be punched to kill it. Here the layout becomes a lot more confusing. The platform at the top, it moves when you step onto it, so you can sling yourself back and forth. Only the very bottom goes completely across the stage. Everything else has gaps in the middle of it. Sometimes some of the letters go a bit wild on this stage too, shooting out off the right and left-hand side of the screen to fly wildly. As you collect the letters, a ladder is built on screen, but you can't interact with it at all. You can't climb up it or down it to get between tiers. It's just there as part of the background. And what I've just shown you is literally all there is to playing Popeye. I find it to be extremely easy to play. In the footage I captured for this video, on my first game, I got to level 7. The action is kind of slow and clunky. On higher rounds, it becomes more interesting between the sea hag throwing skulls and the letters or hearts or notes moving much faster, but it's still just not that great. The layout of each of the levels isn't really conducive to a great flow of gameplay. Bluto being the sole obstacle in most cases isn't that interesting or difficult to avoid. If it wasn't for the Nintendo brand, Popeye would be another forgotten early 80s arcade game consigned to the dustbin of history. And I think the reception of Popeye kind of proves that out. Even during the Famicom boom days between 1984 and 1985, when even the most innocuous of games could get 1 million sales, Popeye sold under 500,000 units in Japan. That's a lot of copies, but it's also kind of middle of the road for Famicom cartridges at the time. But if there's one thing that's most damning about this game, it's that when Nintendo lost the license to Popeye in the early 90s, they never bothered to seek it out again to reprint this game. Even now, when they could easily afford it if they wanted to put Popeye back out there for fans, it's just not. They're not interested. Nintendo's Popeye is probably never going to be re-released, and I can't say I'm really going to miss it.